What's your craziest grandpa story? Story 1. Growing up, my grandpa was always a bit of a mystery to me. He was a quiet man who mostly kept to himself, and he never really talked about his past. However, one day, I accidentally stumbled upon a story that would forever change my perception of him and reveal truly how bad he was. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was bored out of my mind, so I decided to do a little exploring in the attic. As I rummaged through the old and dusty boxes, I found a worn leather journal hidden under a pile of old clothes. Curious, I opened it up, just to discover that it belonged to my grandpa. The entries actually dated back to his time serving in the military during World War II. As I flipped through the pages, I found an entry that caught my attention. It told the story of a mission that he and his squad were assigned to deep in enemy territory. Their goal was to sabotage a heavily fortified enemy base and gather crucial intelligence. The mission, it was extremely dangerous, and I knew that the odds were probably stacked against them. As they made their way through the dense forest, they encountered a group of enemy soldiers, and a firefight ensued. Grandpa described the chaos and terror of the battle in very vivid detail, but what really stood up to me was his bravery and quick thinking in the heat of the moment. During the firefight, my grandfather, best friend, was shot, gravely wounded, unable to move. Well, refusing to leave him behind, my grandpa carried his friend on his back while still managing to return fire and keep the enemy at bay. He managed to get his friend to the safety and then rejoin the fight, rallying his squad and leading them to a successful assault on the enemy base. The mission was a success, and the intelligence they gathered proved to be invaluable to the war. However, Grandpa never received any recognition or commendation for his bravery. In fact, the whole mission was classified and the details were never made public. After reading his account, I couldn't help but feel a newfound respect and admiration for Grandpa. Well, I was in awe of his courage and selfishness. I was proud to be his grandson. So I decided to confront him about the journal and the story that I've read. At first he was hesitant to talk about it, but eventually he opened up and shared more details about his time in war. He told me about the bonds he formed with his fellow soldiers, the horrors that they faced, and the sacrifices made. As he spoke, I could see a mix of pride and sadness in his eyes. It's clear that the memories still weighed heavily on him, even after all these years, but he also seemed relieved to finally share his story with somebody. From that day on, my relationship with my grandpa changed. We grew closer, and I found myself hanging on to every word of his stories, eager to learn more about the man behind the quiet exterior. He may not have been a decorated war hero, but to me, he was the epitome of a bad-a. Years later, when my grandpa passed away, I inherited his journal. I've just kept it as a reminder of the incredible man he was and the sacrifices made. His story may never be told in history books, but it always have a special place in my heart. My grandpa may have been an unsung hero, but he'll always be my grandpa. Story 2. Growing up, I always knew my grandpa was a retired firefighter, but I never really understood the gravity of his experiences or the extent of his bravery until one day, when he shared a story that left me in awe. It was during the summer break when I was staying at my grandparents' house, and one evening as we sat on the porch, I asked my grandpa to tell me a story from his time as a firefighter. With a thoughtful look on his face, he began to recount an incident that happened many years ago. My grandpa was part of an elite firefighting team in a large city. They were known for tackling the most dangerous and complex fires, and their teamwork was legendary. One day, they were called to a fire at a high-rise building. The fire had quickly spread, trapping many residents on the upper floor. As they arrived at the scene, they realized the situation was indeed dire. The building was engulfed in flames, and the fire had already caused several floors to collapse. Despite the risk, my grandpa and his team knew they had to act fast, just to save many lives as possible. With fearlessness and determination, they began their ascent up the burning building. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke made it very near impossible to see or breathe. They had to rely on their training and instincts, I would assume, just to navigate the treacherous conditions. As they reached the upper floor, they found a group of trapped residents, including a young mother with her 2 small children. The stairwell, well, it was collapsed, cutting off their escape route completely. My grandpa knew that they needed to find another way out, but time was running out. With the flames closing in, my grandpa came up with a daring plan. See, he instructed his team to secure ropes and harnesses intended to rappel down the side of the building with trapped residents. It was an incredibly risky maneuver, but it's their only chance to get everybody out alive. As they prepared for the descent, the flames grew more intense and the building began to groan under the stress. My grandpa took the young mother and her children in his arms, and with the help of his team, they began to rappel down the building. The descent was slow and precarious, and the heat from the flames was scorching. But Grandpa remained calm and focused, reassuring the terrified family that they would make it out safely in no time. As they neared the ground, a crowd of onlookers and fellow firefighters cheered them on, praying for their safe arrival. With only a few feet left to go, the building finally succumbed to the fire and began to collapse. The ground shook and debris rained down around them, but my grandpa never wavered. He shielded the young family with his own body and continued their descent, finally reaching the ground just moments before the building crumbled completely. The crowd then erupted, basic cheers and applause, and the young mother tearfully embraced Grandpa, thanking him for saving her family. Though exhausted and covered in soot, my grandpa simply smiled, knowing that he's done his job, and as he finished his story, I looked at my grandpa with a newfound admiration and respect. The courage, selfishness that he displayed that day was nothing short of extraordinary. I knew that then my grandpa was not just a retired firefighter. Oh no, he was a true hero and the epitome of a bad A. From that day on, I was inspired to be more like Gramps. Brave, selfless, and always willing to help. His thrilling story of heroism will forever be etched in my memory, and I'm proud to call him Grandpa the Fearless Firefighter. Story number 3. When I was a kid, my grandpa used to tell me stories about his adventures as a treasure hunter. I thought he was just making them up to entertain me, but one summer day, he decided he was going to show me that there was more to his tales than I could ever imagine. It was the summer before I started high school, and my parents decided to go on a vacation, leaving me with Grandpa for 2 weeks. On the first day, he sat me down and said, "Listen, kiddo, I think it's time I showed you something I've been keeping a secret for a very long time." We got into his old pickup truck and drove down to the outskirts of town, where there was an old barn that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The place was covered in dust and cobwebs, but I could sense that there was something special about it. Grandpa handed me a flashlight and led me to a corner. There was a hidden door behind some old sacks of grain. Well, as we entered the secret room, I was astonished to see the walls lined with shelves, all filled with artifacts and trinkets from all around the world. Old maps, gold coins, and even a crystal skull. Grandpa told me that every single item in the room had a story behind it, and that he had collected them all during his time as a treasure hunter. I was speechless, and my eyes must have been as wide as saucers. He just chuckled and said, "I knew you'd be surprised. Now let me tell you about one of my favorite adventures." Grandpa began to recount a tale from his younger days, when he and his best friend George went on a treasure hunt in a remote jungle, South America. They heard rumors of an ancient temple hidden deep within the jungle or something like that, containing this priceless artifact. He told me how dangerous the journey was going to be, and they had overcome countless obstacles, including treacherous terrain, poisonous snakes, and even a tribe of hostile natives. Well, after weeks of searching, they finally found the temple, half buried in vines and overgrown vegetation. The two of them ventured inside, navigating through dark and narrow passages, avoiding booby traps and solving riddles left by the ancient civilization that built the temple. Well, eventually, they did reach it inside and got to the temple, where they found the artifact that they've been searching for. An enormous, intricately carved jade statue of a mythical creature. Well, they knew taking it would probably set off a bigger trap, but they decided to risk it for the biscuit. Anyways, as soon as they lifted the statue of its pedestal, the temple began to rumble and shake. They raced back through the passages, narrowly avoiding being crushed by collapsing walls and ceilings. They finally make it out just as the temple starts to crush. It was completely enthralled by the story, and I could not believe that my grandpa had actually lived through such an incredible adventure. I didn't even believe him at first. When he finished the story, he handed me a small jade carving that had been part of the statue. They found it, and he told me that he wanted me to have it as a reminder of the adventures we could have together. For the rest of the summer, Grandpa and I went on our own treasure hunts, exploring the woods behind his house and finding hidden treasures even in flea markets and garage sales. Well, they weren't as grand as his other adventures, but they were still incredibly special to me. Years have passed and my grandpa's no longer with us, but I still have that jade carving, and every time I look at it, I'm reminded of the amazing story that he told me and the adventure that we shared. My grandpa may have been a treasure hunter in his younger days, but to me, he'll always be the greatest grandfather I've ever had. As I grew older, I became more interested in the story and history behind the artifacts that he collected. So I started researching and learning about the cultures and civilizations they come from. Eventually, I decided to study archaeology in college, inspired by my grandpa and the incredible stories that he shared with me. During my studies, I often thought about, how lucky I was to have a grandpa who sparked my curiosity and passion for history and adventure. I realized that his stories not only entertained me, but also taught me valuable lessons about perseverance, courage, and friendship. After I graduated, I decided to honor my grandpa's memory by continuing his work as a so-called treasure hunter, searching for lost artifacts and preserving their stories for future generations. I traveled the world, uncovering any hidden secret or treasure I could, and just learning about the rich history behind each one. One of my expeditions, I came across an ancient map that led me to a hidden city buried deep within a mountain range. The city was said to contain lots of treasure troves of knowledge and priceless artifacts. After months of careful planning and preparation, I set on a journey to find the lost city. The journey's challenging and dangerous, but just like the adventures my grandfather used to tell me about, I faced harsh weather conditions, treacherous mountain passes, and even a few close encounters with wild animals. But every single step of the way, I felt my grandpa's spirit guiding me and giving me the strength to carry on. When I finally reached the lost city, I was amazed by the beauty and grandeur of the ancient civilization, and one that once thrived there. I carefully documented my findings and recovered several artifacts that would be invaluable to historians and archaeologists. As I stood in the heart of the city, holding a priceless artifact in my hand, I could not help but feel a deep connection to my grandpa. In that moment, I knew that I was carrying on his legacy, and I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude for the incredible man who had inspired me to embark on this journey. Today, I continue to explore and uncover the hidden treasures of the world, driven by the spirit of adventure that my grandpa, once instilled into me. I know that he'd be proud of what I'm doing, and I feel honored to be following in his footsteps. My grandpa may have not been famous or even well known, but his stories and adventures will forever live on in my heart. And who knows? Maybe someday I'll have my own grandchild to share these stories with, just continuing the legacy of a truly amazing treasure hunter. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. So maybe you have your own crazy grandfather stories. go ahead and leave your most insane story in the comment section down below. If you're new to the channel, press that subscribe button for daily questions, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.